Hello and welcome to a little bit of a impromptu video I'm just making on a new feature I've got in Aurena. So this is a new feature I've been putting in over the last few days and I really think it's cool. It's probably, again, shows slight signs of over-engineering, which is what this app's all about, so the more the merrier. So without further ado, let me show you what I've been doing. We have a new tab. It is called Workflows, and as you can see at the moment, there's nothing going on. Now you might be getting a sense of where I might be going with this. So many years ago I used to work for a company called Route 6, which became bought by Telestream, and we made a product called Content Agent, and that was basically a server-based render farm that distributed work by completing various workflows. So you could send media into it, you could transcode it to different formats and deliver it to different locations. You could do all sorts of stuff with it. And the way we did this is we built workflows. I wanted to recapture some of that old Route 6 feeling, so I've decided to implement workflows in Aurena. And actually, it's not quite as crazy as it may sound. So I'll give you an example of a workflow that we have now. Is if you're in the album edit tab, you might want to change the name of the artist or the name of the album. Ordinarily what that will involve is, because this music player is based around a series of folders, so you have folders that represent the artist and then inside of it you have the album names underneath. So this is a very typical sort of music collection layout. If you want to change either of those, then you have to rename the folders and shift stuff around. So if, for example, I'm going to the edit mode here and I sort of 007 Collective 1, if I now save that, what happens is a series of operations occur which involve moving folders around and stuff, and you'll notice that a workflow has sprung up to do this. Why, you may ask, am I doing something so extensive just to shift some files into a different folder? Well, there's a particular problem I was trying to solve here which the workflows fix. And the problem is, when you're moving files into another folder, you're doing several things and you're essentially committing to a database. So what happens is we need to move the files and then we need to tell the database that the file move is completed, so that when we go back into the album's grid, that it will correctly resolve the files and we can still play the tracks. The problem with this, and this is a problem that the workflow solves, is that these are all very different operations. You can't do them atomically. And what I mean by atomically is, you can't do them all at once. You can't do a file move, guarantee that works properly, and then update a database. There's not really any physical way of tying those tasks together unless you use a workflow. And that's exactly what's happened here. So we updated the artist name. That caused a write tag task to start, and that updates all the tag data within the media files underneath, the music files. The next thing we do is we copy the files, so we're going to copy the files into the new folder. And then the next and final thing is we need to update the location in the database to say all the files are now in this folder and you need to know that that's where they are. And then there's a final cleanup step, and the reason for that is when we copy the files, we don't delete and move, we do a copy. And that means that if anything goes wrong, we've still got the original files in the original location. And what the cleanup does is it basically just deletes that at the end. The way this works is it will only move on to next step if the previous step succeeds. This effectively allows us to create a distributed transaction in a way. I guess this is where I'm borrowing from my experience with distributed systems, because we're doing different things. In of itself, this is a very happy path. Everything goes through and life is good. But what if something fails? What if we get to copy files and say the file system is unavailable, or maybe there's a file lock issue, we can't copy them? Well, what happens is essentially the workflow will fail at this point, and we have a retry mechanism. And what will happen is, with an exponential backoff, and that's a backoff that basically tries it, goes back a bit, waits a bit longer, tries again. That fails, and we wait a little bit longer than that, and then we try again. And the idea is that we can keep trying until the problem has gone away. Now, in Aurena by default, we will try this 5 times. And if after that, we will then fail the workflow altogether. It's not all done there though, because in the feature that I will be adding soon, it's not in there quite yet. There will be a manual retry button. So you would be able to fix the problem if it's something that you can't resolve automatically. You might have to free up some space on your drive, you might have to unlock some files manually, something like that, that then causes the whole system to be able to accept the workflow again. Well, you can absolutely go in there and retry it. And so the point of this is you can actually if the worst happens and your album rename goes wrong, well, actually you can have a way to resume that task and end up in what we call eventual consistency, which basically means eventually the rename operation will be successful, or if it's not, we can manually intervene. One other thing I want to talk about as well is I was just talking about things failing, and the part that makes this reliable is also the ordering of the nodes. So this is something I only touched on just now, but I wanted to touch on a little bit more. This is ordered in a very particular way, and that's for a very good reason. So the idea is we write tags first. Okay, if that fails, fine. Nothing destructive has happened at this point. However, if we get to the copy and for some reason we can't copy anything, well, this is going to fail. And what that means is that the update location node won't run, which means that the album won't be repointed to its location. So that means in the event of failure, okay, we have a few partial files left over. We have a few partial files in the new directory, but we don't have a database entry that's pointing to a wrong folder. This will still absolutely carry on working. So the idea is that we copy the files, and note we are copying. So let's say this time we write the tags, that's all good. We copy the files, that's all good. But then something goes wrong with the update location. Okay, that's no sweat either, because don't forget what I said, we've copied the files, we haven't deleted the original. The database location will still be intact. Those two operations are protected. We can fail the file copy, we can fail an update location, and all is good. Third thing is the cleanup, and that happens right at the very end. So that's only going to delete the old files in the old location if all the other steps pass. So you can see that actually the way this workflow has been organized, it should be very difficult for it to go wrong in a way that would be destructive to the system. And that really was the whole point of writing a workflow system, was to avoid those sorts of issues. That's the story for changing album titles and artist titles, and that's kind of okay, not that interesting. But what the workflow engine does allow us to do, which is much more interesting, is we can now export different tracks. So if you go into an album on here, you'll notice that in the context menu now we have an export option. That allows me to select an encoding profile. Encoding profiles can be defined in this editor here, and I'll show you that shortly in a minute. You can select an encoding profile, you can select a destination folder, so I'm going to go for my exports, which is already selected, and it will tell you which tracks it's going to export. I can actually go in here and I can select different tracks manually, so if I only want to export 3 tracks, no problem with doing that. I can just select those manually and send them through, and they will appear in this dialog box. I'm going to go for the whole lot here, so let's just do a quick export. Now, it doesn't look like anything's happened, but if we jump into the workflow editor, you'll now see that it started with the source, which is our album, and it's now munching on all those tracks and it's converting them into the output format that we selected. Talking of output formats, here they are. This is our encoding profiles editor, and this allows us to add different profiles. So we've got AAC audio, FLAC, MP3 and OGG as I like to call it, and you can set different options depending on the format that you select. So all the common options are in there, and that allows you to export anything you like into any format that you want. It doesn't stop there, because if you know anything about Aurena, you know that it doesn't only support these standard audio types, it also supports retro chip tunes. And what's different about those is they're not WAV format, they're not MP3 format, they're not AAC audio. What they are is they're special AY files, SID files. They represent the data that would have been passed to the audio chip on the computer that the tune's being played back on. This is a little bit harder to render because it's not just a straightforward pass the audio through an encoding system. You have to do something else first. And this is where we get a slightly more complex workflow. So let me go into this one here, and this time I'm just going to select a couple of tracks. So there they are. And if I now go up to the export up here, you'll see that those 2 tracks I selected are the only ones there. So I've selected those, and now I'm going to export those as well. Similar drill to before, but look at the workflow editor, you'll see that we've now got an extra step. And that's because we have to render the tunes into a WAV file first before we can do the encode, because they're not in a suitable file format to start with. So we get an extra node, and into there we can now see that that has completed. Now if I was to bring up my Finder window, which hopefully you can see here, if I jump into users, let's have a look, Damien, and then Aurena exports. If I go down to mix, so this is what we've just been exporting. We've got 0 to 9, which are those 2 tracks, and I can probably play this. Let's give that a go. I'll just demonstrate quick times here. You can probably hear that. That's actually a SID tune using sampled audio, so I hope that doesn't get me a YouTube strike down. But that gives you an idea of what we can do with retro tracks and ordinary tracks. You can see there we've got the other tracks that we exported. But it doesn't stop there. There's one other thing that we might want to export, and that is playlists. And the other important thing about playlists is playlists are perfectly capable of containing a mixture of what I would call standard audio and chip tunes. So in here we've got 2 chip tunes, Remix Whizball, Demo Licks, and then we've got a couple of Beatles songs in here come together and sunking. And in exactly the same way, I can go in there, I'm going to export all of them, click on export, let's have a look at the workflow editor. So that's now beginning that, and what it will do is it's going to render the SID tunes first, so there's 2 tunes in there that have to be rendered, and then what it will do is it will then encode the collective audio files, so there'll be WAVs, MP3s, AACs, whatever the album contains, and it can be a mixture of tracks. And what overall happens here is we will get the exported playlist in here, which is right down here, and once it's finished, we're not quite finished the final file yet, though it's still working on the encode for that, but what you'll notice is we now have the 2 Beatles tracks exported, and if we just give me another couple of moments, there you go, there comes the first of the SID tunes, and then the second one will come. So it doesn't matter what's in your playlist essentially. If you have a playlist that consists of normal audio and some chip tunes and you want to extract that, absolutely fine, you can go and do it. And that is the real strength of Workflows. That is the new workflow engine. The other thing that's wired up to it, I can't show it here because I'm on a Mac, but on a Linux machine, CD-RIP process now goes through the workflow as well. What that will do is that basically just allows the workflow to be in a more centralized location. So the UI will still work in here, but you'll get a CD extract workflow going along, and it will just show you the progress of what that's doing as well. So it's basically just unifying everything together under one umbrella. Workflows in Aurena, probably a huge over-engineering task, but actually I think it makes I think it has a really appropriate presence within this application, and well, it's not out yet, but when it is, I hope you have a go with it and see what you think. Anyway, have fun everyone, and thanks for listening.